Back in 1958, a British bearing manufacturer pulled off the impossible. He beat Ferrari 6 times in one season and did it using an engine built from motorcycle parts, a body shaped by an aerospace engineer, and a grudge so bitter it almost killed him. His name was Tony Vandervell, and the car was the Vanwall. Here are 10 things you need to know about the machine built for one reason only: to destroy Ferrari. Number 10. It all started with bearings. Tony Vandervell was no racing driver. He was a hard-nosed industrialist making engine bearings in his factory in Acton, West London. His company, Vandervell Products, made a revolutionary part called the thin wall bearing. They were snap-in parts backed by a steel strip to replace the old poured bearings used across the motor industry. Those older bearings had to be cast in place and hand-finished, which was slow and imprecise. Vandervell's thin wall bearings were precision parts that snapped straight and transforming engine manufacturing worldwide. Vandervell supplied them directly to Maranello, giving him something priceless: total access. He could walk straight into Ferrari's factory, inspect their engines, study their engineering, and see exactly what made the fastest racing cars on Earth tick. Any other businessman would have been happy just collecting the invoices. Vandervell was taking notes. Number 9, he bought Ferraris and painted them green. Before Vandervell built his own car, he bought the enemy's. In 1949, he purchased a Ferrari Grand Prix car, a 2125. He painted it British racing green, packed it with his thin wall bearings, and dubbed it the Thin Wall Special. For several years, he raced these modified Ferraris in non-championship events across Britain. They were driven by some of the best racing drivers around, including Regé Parnell, Mike Hawthorne, and Peter Collins. These cars were rolling test beds. He pushed his bearings under real race conditions, analyzed the strengths and flaws of Italian design at every track, discovering exactly how to beat them. The rivalry between Vandervell and Enzo Ferrari was pure friction from day one. When Vandervell stripped down one of the Ferraris and found it built from worn-out recycled parts, he sent Enzo a blistering letter packed with photos of the terrible build quality. Both men were cut from the same cloth, stubborn, demanding, and completely obsessed with engines. But Vandervell was channeling his anger into a blueprint. Number 8, he walked away from the national racing effort in disgust. In the late 1940s, Britain launched a massive national project called BR, British Racing Motors. The plan was to pool resources from across British industry and engineer a world-beating Grand Prix car with a screaming 16-cylinder engine. The ambition was massive. The execution was a total disaster. Vandervell was one of this project's biggest backers, pouring serious money into it. He even bought that first Ferrari just to give BRM's engineers hands-on experience with a real Grand Prix car while they struggled with their own. Then he watched the project drown in committee meetings, bureaucratic red tape, and political arguments. The BRM-16 was brilliant but highly unreliable, and the committee running the project cared more about procurement policies than winning. Committees do not win races. When endless supply issues and lack of cooperation dragged the program down, Vandervell tried to smash through the red tape, but his patience finally snapped. He walked away from BRM to do it himself. He would build his own car, run his own team, and defeat Ferrari on his own terms. His mission was simple. He wanted to beat, and this is a direct quote, those bloody red cars. Number 7, he hired an aircraft designer to shape the body. When Vandervell decided to build a proper Grand Prix racer in 1956, he avoided traditional designers, choosing Colin Chapman instead. A young engineer then building lightweight Lotus sports cars in a small workshop who had never designed a Grand Prix car before. Chapman engineered the chassis using a space frame design that was far lighter and stiffer than the Cooper-built chassis Vanwall had run previously. Then Chapman brought in someone even more unconventional for the bodywork. Frank Sen was not a car designer by trade. He was an aerodynamicist at the de Havilland Aircraft Company, the same firm that built the famous Mosquito bomber and Comet jet airliner. His only previous car body design was the Lotus Mark Weight sports racer 2 years earlier, and he had never worked on a Grand Prix car. Sen applied pure aviation aerodynamics to the Vanwall, creating a smooth, teardrop-shaped body so aerodynamically clean that no Ferrari could keep up on the high-speed straights of the 1950s Grand Prix circuits. His bold decision to increase the car's frontal area actually cut overall drag because the smoother shape created less turbulence. This machine looked like nothing else on the grid. The press dubbed it the teardrop Vanwall. While other teams built boxy upright machines with flat panels and exposed wheels, this Vanwall looked like it belonged in the sky. Number 6, the engine was 4 motorcycle cylinders bolted together. This is where the story gets incredibly strange. Vandervell had strong ties to Norton Motorcycles through family, and Norton's racing department had developed one of the best single-cylinder engines on Earth for their 500 cubic centimeter Grand Prix bikes. Vandervell's engineers, led by Norton's own Leo, Kusmicki took the cylinder head design from Norton's single and built a 4-cylinder Grand Prix motor by mounting 4 of those motorcycle cylinders onto a shared crankcase. The bore and stroke matched the Norton racing engine perfectly. Kusmicki designed the combustion chambers with squish zones, a technique Norton pioneered on their racing singles in 1951 to boost turbulence and improve combustion. The crankcase itself used casting patterns borrowed from Rolls-Royce. The connecting rods were forged from nickel steel and machined down until the web was barely 2.5 millimeters thick, then polished smooth. Every component was built to aviation tolerances, not car factory standards. The result was a 2.5-liter inline-4 making about 265 horsepower on aviation fuel by 1958. It wasn't the most powerful engine on the grid, but it didn't need to be. Paired with Frank Costin's aerodynamic body, the Vanwall had the straight line speed to run down any Ferrari on the grid. Number 5, Vandervell refused to make it purely British. This is what set Vandervell apart from the BRM crowd. They were obsessed with building an all-British car, sourcing everything domestically, even if vastly superior options existed abroad. Vandervell didn't care about flags, he only cared about winning. If the world's best fuel injection came from Germany, he used Bosch. And if the superior disc brake technology came from an American patent, he used Goodyear aviation disc brakes adapted from aircraft manufacturing them in his own workshops with radial drilling for lightness and heat dissipation. Those brakes gave the Vanwall a stopping advantage that rivals simply couldn't match. The gearbox design borrowed from Ferrari using a Porsche-designed 5-speed synchromesh gear set. The fuel tank's construction and piping came from Italian suppliers, while his famous thin wall bearings were actually derived from American patents. One of Vandervell's own associates summed him up as a rugged old bugger. He loved it. His entire philosophy was brutally practical. Find the absolute best in the world wherever they are and use whatever it takes to crush Ferrari. The result was a British named internationally engineered weapon that was absolutely lethal on the track. Over 80% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. If you love classic racing and the wild characters who risked everything to build these machines, hit subscribe. We bring you stories like this every week. Number 4, the 1957 breakthrough. On July 20th, 1957, at the Aintree Circuit near Liverpool, something happened that hadn't occurred in 34 years. A British-built car won a Formula One World Championship race. Stirling Moss started on pole in his Vanwall, but an engine misfire forced him to pit after 21 laps. His teammate Tony Brooks, still recovering from a violent crash at Le Mans just weeks prior, was ordered to hand over his car. Moss jumped into Brooks' Vanwall in 9th place, shattered his own lap record, hunted down the front-runners, and tore through the pack to win before a wild home crowd. It was a shared victory, the very last time in Formula One history that 2 drivers drove a single car to win, and it was a British car with British drivers. The last time that happened in a major Grand Prix was 1923 when Henry Seagrave won in a Sunbeam. 34 years of Italian and German dominance shattered in one afternoon. Vandervell followed that up with 2 more victories at Pescara and Monza later that season, with Moss finishing second in the Drivers' Championship behind Juan Manuel Fangio. The Vanwall was no longer a curiosity, it was a lethal threat to Ferrari. Number 3, the driver lineup was the best in Britain. For 1958, Vandervell assembled a 3-car squad that was arguably the strongest on the grid. Stirling Moss was widely considered the fastest driver in the world. He had finished second in the championship 3 straight years and was desperate for a title. Tony Brooks, nicknamed the Racing Dentist because he studied dentistry while competing in Grand Prix racing at the absolute limit, was one of the most naturally gifted and mechanically sympathetic drivers of his era. He rarely abused the machinery, which meant fewer mechanical failures. Stuart Lewis Evans, a quiet 28-year-old from Kent whose father had worked as a mechanic for racer Earl Howe, completed the lineup. Lewis Evans earned his seat with a stunning 4th place on his debut at Monaco in 1957, driving an underpowered Connaught against factory Maseratis and Ferraris. Ferrari countered with Mike Hawthorne, Peter Collins, and Luigi Musso. On paper, they were perfectly matched. But Vanwall faced a massive technical challenge. New regulations forced everyone to run on aviation fuel instead of the alcohol mixtures used in previous years. The Vanwall's massive cylinders relied on alcohol to keep cool. Switching to aviation fuel meant the engine ran incredibly hot. Vandervell's engineers spent the winter redesigning valves and pistons to survive the extreme heat. The grind paid off. On track, Vanwall's lethal mix of raw speed, slippery aerodynamics, and elite driving talent proved unbeatable. Number 2, Moss won 4 races and still lost the title by 1 point. The 1958 season remains one of the most dramatic in Formula One history. Vanwall took 6 of the 10 championship races. Moss triumphed in the Netherlands, Portugal, and Morocco, while Brooks conquered Belgium, Germany, and Italy. Lewis Evans brought home vital points with podiums in Belgium and Portugal. Together, they absolutely dominated the season like no British team in history. Vanwall clinched the first ever Constructors Championship with 48 points to Ferrari's 40. It was the debut year of the title, and the first name on the trophy was Vanwall. Mission accomplished. Those bloody red cars were finally beaten, except for one cruel twist of fate. Despite winning 4 races that season, Stirling Moss lost the Drivers' Championship to Ferrari's Mike Hawthorn by just 1 single point. Hawthorn won just 1 race all year, the French Grand Prix at Reims. It remains one of only 2 times in Formula One history where a driver won the championship with a single victory. And the reason Moss lost comes down to one of the most legendary acts of sportsmanship in racing history. At the Portuguese Grand Prix, Hawthorn spun on the final lap and faced disqualification for pushing his car against the track direction. Moss, who won the race, went to the stewards himself to testify that Hawthorn had actually pushed his car on the pavement, not on the racing track itself. The stewards reinstated Hawthorn's points. 2 races later, those exact points handed Hawthorn the world title by a single point over Moss. When asked years later if he regretted it, Moss had 0 hesitation. He'd do it again. Number 1, the victory that cost Vandervell everything. The final race of 1958 was the Moroccan Grand Prix at the Ain Diab circuit in Casablanca. The constructors' title was already wrapped up in Vanwall's favor. Moss won the race. It should have been a massive celebration. Instead, it marked the final tragedy of what was already the deadliest season in Formula One history. 4 drivers had died that season, including Ferrari's Peter Collins and Luigi Musso. On lap 42, Stuart Lewis Evans lost control of his Vanwall when the drivetrain seized at high speed. The car slammed into the barriers and violently burst into flames. Lewis Evans scrambled out of the cockpit, but his overalls were ablaze, causing catastrophic burns. Vandervell chartered a private Viscount airliner to fly him back to Britain. They removed several seats from the cabin to make room for a stretcher. Lewis Evans lay there completely covered in bandages, sipping tea and chatting as best he could, but his brave, quiet dignity masked the sheer severity of his injuries. He was admitted to the specialist burns unit at East Grinstead Hospital. He died 6 days later at just 28 years old. Vandervell was devastated, his own health already wrecked by years of stress and heavy smoking. The relentless intensity of running a championship racing team collapsed completely. In January 1959, Vandervell Products announced the team was withdrawing from competition. The Vanwall never raced at full factory strength again. Vandervell himself died in 1967 at the age of 68. He had built a racing team with one purpose: beat Ferrari. And he did it. He won the first Constructors Championship in Formula One history, but the toll of that victory destroyed everything he had built. The Vanwall name sits first on the Constructors Championship trophy, etched forever ahead of every team that followed. Cooper, Lotus, Ferrari, McLaren, Williams, Mercedes, Red Bull, they all came after. Vandervell got there first. If this changed how you see British motorsport history, hit subscribe. More coming soon.